we move forward. Bale, one of the last 4 topics. Directors and officers. Alright? Now, napapasadahan na natin kanina kung ano ang ginagawa ng board at kung kailan siya kinakailangan, ano bang mga policy directives, anong corporate powers yung kinakailangan na ang board ang nag-exercise, kailan nila kinakailangang pumoto. Now, having established all of that, let us go back to basics. How does a person even become a director in the first place? What must he or she possess in order to qualify? Now, for stock corporations, this person must own at least 1 capital stock in their own name. Hindi kinakailangang marami. Just 1. Just 1 is sufficient. For non-stock corporations, though, the person who is to be a trustee, considering that, di ba, in non-stock corporations, hindi board of directors ang tawag natin, kundi board of trustees. Now, in order to be a trustee, this person must be a member. Now, needless to say, a director or a trustee has to be of legal age, of course, in order to be able to enter into agreements, di ba? Kinakailangan din na morally upright ang isang director. A director or a trustee for that matter must not have been convicted by final judgment of an offense punishable by imprisonment for a period exceeding 6 years. So, kinakailangan bang... Now the question here would be, kapag ang kulong lang naman ay 2 years, pwede ba? Pwede naman. Kasi ang sinasabi, ang prohibition under the Revised Corporation Code points to imprisonment for a period exceeding 6 years. So, kinakailangan 6 years and 1 day pataas. No? Or, no, convicted by final judgment of a violation of the Revised Corporation Code or for violating the Securities Regulation Code. Or, found administratively liable for any offense involving fraudulent acts. So, kung merong administrative liability para sa panloloko o panlalamang, hindi siya pwede maging director. Now, kailangan bang domestic court? Kailangan bang sa Pilipinas lang? Sa Pilipinas lang ang finding? Now, what if convicted siya overseas of an offense punishable by imprisonment for a period of 6 years, exceeding 6 years. So 6 years and 1 day and above. Hindi ba yun i-honor dito? I-honor yun dito. Because Section 26 of the Revised Corporation Code explicitly provides na ganun din ang effect if the final judgment was issued by a foreign court or equivalent foreign regulatory agency for similar acts or actions. Of course, the corporation has sufficient elbow room, to add additional qualifications in their bylaws. So kung gusto nila na kinakailangan there has to be particular educational attainment, gusto nila masters lang, masters graduate, nang hindi lang basta-basta masters course. Kinakailangan, hindi pa pwedeng MA o Master of Arts, kinakailangan Masters in Business Administration, kinakailangan MBA. Kasi of course, when you enter into corporate, kung gusto mong mabuhay bilang isang direktor ng isang korporasyon, you have to dive headfirst into the realm of business, So kailangan MBA graduate with honors. Pwede ba 'yon? Pwede 'yon if provided for in the bylaws. Of course, kung kinakailangan na may 10 years of experience, pwede ring ilagay sa bylaws. How many years of experience do you want? Do you accept fresh graduates for directorial positions? Lahat yan pwedeng sagutin sa bylaws. Ngayon, kung meron din silang gustong ipagbawal o bawal ang nag-positive sa drug test, o bawal ang nag-chain smoking, bawal ang punong-puno ng tattoo ang katawan. Though personally, I would disagree with that last one kasi that is utterly discriminatory. We have to measure the worth of people by merit, not simply because of how they look, But anyway, no, that's another question for another day. The point is that other qualifications pwedeng i-provide yan under the bylaws. Now, another set of additional qualifications would be for partly nationalized activities. Kasi kung mapapansin ninyo, balikan natin ha, may nabasa ba kayo dito na kinakailangan ang director Filipino citizen? Or at least residing in the Philippines? I'll give you some time to take a look. Napansin niyo, di ba? Walang ganong requirement. I think before, a long time ago, during the effectivity of the previous corporation code, there was that requirement. But under the present code, there is no longer such a requirement here. And therefore, no, foreign citizen, sure. But when it comes to partly nationalized activities, yung kinakailangang applyan ng 60-40 rule, na kung saan kinakailangan lahat ng executive and management positions doon sa korporasyon, kinakailangang Pilipino ang nakaupo. Then of course, you have to follow that. For those kinds of corporations, if kailangang Pilipino ang umupo bilang direktor, kailangan niyang sundin. Now, how long does a director sit, or a trustee for that matter? A director has a term of office of 1 year. A trustee, on the other hand, may have a term not exceeding 3 years. So, pwedeng 1 taon? Yes. Pwedeng 2 taon? Okay lang din. Pwedeng 3 taon? Yes, that's the maximum. Okay? Both provided under Section 22 of the Revised Corporation Code. Now, let us move forward and study the concept of independent directors. Kasi minsan, no, especially for those partly nationalized industries and other similar endeavors that we will be talking about in a bit, merong nire-require na kinakailangang may nakaupong independent director. So what are these persons? No? Who are these persons? An independent director is a person who, apart from shareholdings and fees received from the corporation, is independent of management and free from any business or other relationship which could reasonably be perceived to materially interfere with the exercise of independent judgment in carrying out the responsibilities as director. Also provided under Section 22 of the Revised Corporation Code. So, saang mga korporasyon dapat mayroong independent director? Well, corporations vested with public interest are required to have independent directors constituting at least 20% of the board. Bakit kinakailangang may independent director? Ayon sa batas, in order to promote good governance. You see, hindi naman malayo sa katotohanan na mayroong mga directors na nakaupo who seek to further not necessarily the interest of the corporation but their own interest. No? Mayroong mga if you've tried watching corporate dramas, no? Meron talagang ganyang nangyayari, no? Mga maneuverings na hindi naman talaga para sa kapakinabangan ng korporasyon, kundi para sa kanilang pansariling interest. Gusto nila puro mga kapamilya nila o mga kaibigan nila yung may-ari ng majority ng corporate stock, di ba? So they try to maneuver behind the scenes or even outrightly, but independent directors come into play in order to prevent that from happening. Independent directors are basically ito yung mga impartial experts na nakaupo dyan na hindi madidiktahan, no? Siyempre may mga factionalization sa mga ibang boards, no? Sa ibang mga board of directors. Ang independent director, ang expectation sa kanila ay hindi sila mabubuyo nitong mga faction na to. Na whenever a proposal or a policy is brought to the board for its consideration, for its review, that the independent director will be using his or her expertise or his or her moral compass in order to vote in such a way that would promote the interests of the corporation and of the stockholders. So basically, ito yung mabuting tao. All right? So, now, what are these corporations vested with public interest na kinakailangang merong independent director na nakaupo? Number 1, corporations covered by the Securities Regulation Code. So you would think most of the bigger corporations, so securities registered with the SRC or listed with an exchange or which assets of at least 50 million pesos. So like I said, most of the bigger corporations, no? 50 million by way of capital, considering the magnitude of the likes of SM or of the Villar companies, or even the periodicals like say Manila Bulletin or Inquirer for that matter, Philippine Star. Mahina ang 50 million. Well, how about Double Dragon, di ba? One of the bigger construction firms. SMDC, di ba? Avida, mga ganun. So, if the capital, if the assets of this corporation is at least 50M, or a corporation with 200 or more shareholders, each holding at least 100 shares of a class of its equity shares. So, having 200 or more shareholders at bawat isa doon sa 200 shareholders na yon, merong at least 100 shares. So, corporations covered by the Securities Regulation Code, mga malalaking korporasyon. So, these corporations are vested with public interest. Next one, banks, quasi-banks, pawn shops, etc. So, mga bangko, also vested with public interest. And finally, other corporations that may be determined by the SEC. So, for example, let me show you the profile of one of the most famous independent directors in existence today. You might know this man named Gilberto C. Teodoro Jr., also known as Gibo Teodoro, one of the senatorial hopefuls during the previous election. So Gibo Teodoro is an independent director of BDO Unibank Inc., or just plain BDO. He was elected to the board on April 25, 2014. So I will give you time to take a look at his professional history. No? So before he took office as Secretary of National Defense during the administration of then President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, he was a congressman from 1998 to 2007. So during that point in time, or rather before that point in time, he was in corporate. And after that, bumalik din siya sa corporate world. No? Naging chairman siya ng mga ibang mga korporasyon. A very extensive history in corporate. No? Naging board member, naging chairman, sa kung saan-saan iba't ibang mga kumpanya, from mining to a resources corporation, an energy producer. You see that? Member of the board of directors of Philippine Geothermal Production Company Incorporated. He is also member of the board of Alpha Land Corporation and Canlubang Sugar Estate. So basically, this man is everywhere. Maliban doon sa kanyang public service at corporate leanings, experience, no? He was also, or rather, he continues to advise public sector agencies. No? He is a well sought after advisor. And, gives valuable advice not only to the Air Force apparently, but also to the Navy, and also the recipient of the Philippine Legion of Honor with the rank of Grand Commander. Maliban doon, his lawyerly training is also top-notch. No? He trained under former Solicitor General Estelito P. Mendoza and was involved in litigating a wide range of cases. So you can see here, constitutional law, corporate, criminal, civil, and administrative. And also work pro bono. Pro bono, ibig sabihin walang bayad. Okay? Nakikita ninyo dito sa huli yung kanyang educational attainment, no? Bachelor of Science degree in Commerce, major in Management. So talagang at home siya sa corp, no? At home siya sa corporate. He took up law at UP Law. He took his master's at Harvard. He placed first, top-notcher siya sa 1989 bar. And he also passed the New York State Bar, one of the more lucrative, I would guess, and more sought after bar jurisdictions other than, well, syempre, at home, we have the Philippine bar. If you wish to practice overseas, the first thing that comes to mind is the New York State Bar. So, pasado din siya doon. So, nakikita ninyo, ito yung kadalasang profile ng mga independent director, mga magagaling, mga upright na mga tao who you can count on to make their votes, no? Make their votes sa any policy deliberation ng board of directors dito sa korporasyon na to, using their expertise, guided by their moral compass, just all around being good, being smart, and most importantly, independent. Now, how many directors or trustees should a corporation have? As for directors, as long as hindi siya lalampas ng 15. As for trustees, well, technically, the sky's the limit. Maybe more than 15 individuals. How do we vote for directors anyway? We have established that they have a set term. So of course, once the term expires, kinakailangan ulit mag-elect ng bago. There are two ways, no? There are two ways by which to vote. But most corporations adopt this first one, yung tinatawag nating straight voting. Through straight voting, a stockholder may vote such number of shares for as many persons as there are directors to be elected. So how does straight voting work? No? Ganito. Take Veronica. Veronica is a shareholder sa isang kumpanya, sa XYZ company. Now, no, annual general meeting ng XYZ, isinabay ang eleksyon ng bagong board of directors. So 5 directors ang pagbobotohan. Now, Veronica owns 1,000 shares dito kay XYZ. And each share entitles Veronica to 1 vote. Under the straight voting scheme, what Veronica can do is to vote for a maximum of 1,000 times for each of the 5 directors for a total of 5,000 votes. So yung 1,000 niya, no, times the number of directors in the running. So that would be times 5. So 1,000 times 5, 5,000. Pero pwede ba niyang ibuhos yung 5,000 niya sa isang director lang? No. Yung threshold ng votes niya for each one is only up to the extent of the number of the shares she owns. And therefore, Veronica may vote in this manner. She can place 1,000 votes for Director 1, 500 votes for Director 2, 300 votes for Director 3, 100 votes for Director 4, and 50 votes for Director 5. Be mindful of this formula, okay? Number of shares times the number of directors for election, which will result in the total number of votes. However, you can only cast your votes up to the maximum number per director or candidate. So, again, kay Veronica, how many shares? 1,000 times the number of directors up for election, 5. So, 1,000 times 5, 5,000 votes. Kaso, yung 5,000 votes na yon hindi niya pwedeng ibuo sa sino man dun sa 5, na iisa lang. Yung 5,000 na yun ay hahatiin din. So, pwedeng up to 1,000 votes lang per director in the running. So, yung 5,000, i-divide mo ulit by 5. So, tig 1,000 lang maximum dito kay Director 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Bahala ka na kung gusto mong konsumuhin lahat. So, if you vote 1,000, basta hindi lalampas ng 1,000, otherwise invalid. Okay? So, if you want to place less than 1,000 votes, that would be allowed. Okay? As long as hindi lalampas ng 1,000. Now, the second method is what we call cumulative voting. Cumulative voting is described by analysts and commentators on commercial law as more fair to the minority. Kasi, the minority gets to have a stronger vote as opposed to the other voting method. However, it is precisely for that reason na most corporations do not adopt cumulative voting. Anyway, we still have to study it. So cumulative voting entails a stockholder being allowed to concentrate his votes and give one candidate as many votes as the number of directors to be elected multiplied by the number of his shares shall equal, provided under Section 23 of the Revised Corporation Code. Now, cumulative voting can be done in two ways. Pwedeng cumulative voting for one candidate or cumulative voting by distribution. Now, how does that work? Ito, the first one, cumulative voting for one candidate. So, there are 5 directors to be elected. Ngayon, ito namang si John, as a shareholder, she has 100 shares. So, what can John do? She can give 500 votes. Paano natin na-reach yung 500? We multiply the number of directors by the number of shares that this shareholder has. So 500 is 5 multiplied by 100. So ngayon, cumulative voting for one candidate, pwedeng gamitin ni John itong buong 500 shares, 500 boto rather, at ibigay dun sa isa sa 5 director. All of those, Now, the second sub-method would be cumulative voting by distribution. Now, let us adopt the same scenario. Same premise. There are 5 directors to be elected. We also have John as shareholder. She has 100 shares. Now, if we follow cumulative voting by distribution, she may choose to distribute her votes. She can choose to give 100 votes to candidate 1, 100 votes to candidate 2, 100 votes to candidate 3, 150 votes to candidate 4, and 50 votes to candidate 5. As opposed to straight voting, mapapansin niyo, walang upper threshold dito sa cumulative. Napansin niyo, di ba, merong ang 150 votes for one candidate. That is allowed for cumulative voting. There is no upper limit or threshold. So here's the formula. Number of shares times number of directors for election equal to total number of votes, which you may either do one of two things. Either cast in favor in its entirety, yung total number of votes in favor of just one director candidate, for one candidate only, or distribute among all the directors or candidates, depende sa kung paano mo siya gustong i-distribute. So that's that. I hope that's clear. Baka magtanong ako niyan sa exam. Now, we have mentioned earlier about meetings. There has to be meetings. Diba? Sabi natin, the board of directors is a collegiate body, and therefore, they have to decide as a group. And how do they do that? They meet. They conduct a meeting. Ganon din sa election of directors. There has to be a meeting. At kapag may meeting, kinakailangang mayroong yung tinatawag natin na quorum. At all elections of directors or trustees, there must be present either in person or through an authorized representative na may written authority or through remote communication. The usual, Zoom, Teams, WebEx. Now, for stock corporations, kinakailangan, in order for there to be a quorum, there must be in attendance the owners of a majority of the outstanding capital stock. All right? For non-stock corporations, there must be in attendance a majority of the members entitled to vote. Now, paano kung walang quorum? That would have dire effects on the election. How dire? An election without a quorum is invalid. So kahit nasabihin natin na nagawa nyo na lahat, everybody has cast their vote, yung mga balota na itabi na, magtatali na kayo, so long as there is no quorum, that election is invalid. Is a failure, no? And a meeting called for that purpose, kasi di ba nga, kailangan in the context of a meeting, if there is no quorum, then that meeting may be adjourned. Kasi what are you meeting for? No? Why are you meeting? There is no required number of attendees in order for the group to conduct its official business, because that's what the essence of a quorum is. Now, we have already established what directors or trustees can do. We have established how long sila nagsisilbi. Napasadahan natin kung paano sila nailuluklok. Ngayon, no? We are done with powers. Let us go towards duties. Ano ang mga obligasyon ng isang director? We have what we call, or what the Supreme Court calls, the threefold duty. As explained in Strategic Alliance Development Corporation versus Radstock Securities Limited, GR number 178158, in the Supreme Court's decision dated year 2009. So what comprises this threefold duty? Three things, no? Obedience, diligence, and loyalty. By obedience, a director has the obligation to direct the affairs of the corporation only in accordance with the purposes for which it was organized. Kung business lang, business lang. Hindi pwedeng mayroong pang mga on the side na ipinapasok, may mga side racket pa na itinatago. Kung ito ang trabaho natin, ito lang ang gagawin natin. That, my friends, is obedience. Next up, diligence. By diligence, we mean that a director shall not willfully and knowingly vote for or assent to patently unlawful acts of the corporation, or act in bad faith or with gross negligence in directing the affairs of the corporation. Basically, bahagi ng diligence yung kapag nakita ng isang director na mayroong pinaplanong illegal or mayroong pinopropose na questionable on the floor doon sa isang meeting attended by the board of directors. It is the duty of this director who sees an injustice or who sees anything illegal, no, to speak up and not to assent. Na kapag idinaan sa botohan, he or she shall vote against it. That is the gist of diligence. Now, considering yung obligations or duties of obedience and diligence, we have to take into account the business judgment rule. As a general rule, class, questions of policy or management are left solely to the honest decision of officers and directors of a corporation. Now, the courts are without authority to substitute their judgment for the judgment of the board of directors. So, generally, merong presumption na kapag ang isang bagay ay ginawa ng board, kapag merong desisyon ang board, merong presumption na yun ay, number one, valid. Number two, yun ay in keeping with the business of the corporation. And number three, na those decisions, that policy, no, yan ay honest. And we have to trust the honesty of the directors because sila naman ang experts in the running of the business of the corporation. As mentioned by the Supreme Court in PSC versus CA, GR number 125469, year 1997, the board is the business manager of the corporation. And so long as it acts in good faith, its orders are not reviewable by the courts or the SEC, the SEC, no? So in order for anybody to question the business judgment of the board of directors or one of the directors, one must establish bad faith. Now, what are the exceptions to the business judgment rule? Number one, where the resulting contract is so unconscionable and oppressive as to amount to a wanton destruction of the rights of the minority. if the contract has disenfranchised or prejudiced the minority doon sa korporasyon. Na syempre, ano ba ang nagagawa ng minority sa isang korporasyon kundi sumabay sa agos, no, na minamando ng majority at ng board, di ba? Ngayon, kung merong mali, uninformed o outright illegal na policy direction yung board of directors, at syempre, of course, the corporation will go downhill because of that. Ano naman ang laban ng minority? Syempre wala, di ba? They have little recourse. They can't even dictate where the corporation should go. Because, well, what can they do? Di ba? They're just the minority. So, if that aspect is established, then the business judgment rule can be set aside. Next, no, where it is concluded that there is a violation of the duty of diligence. So, yung isang 'di ba, yung isang director, alam niya, no, na itong proposal na to is potentially illegal, but he did not say anything, he did not vote against it. So there is no diligence, there is no compliance with that duty. And next, no, violation of the doctrine of corporate opportunity, which we will be talking about later. Now, what is the last of the threefold duties, no? The duty of loyalty. By loyalty, we mean that a director shall not acquire any personal or pecuniary interest in conflict with their duty as such directors or trustees. Loyalty simply means no conflict of interest. Yung interest na pinoprotektahan mo bilang director, dapat yung sa korporasyon mo lang. Hindi pwedeng you serve two masters at the same time or serve two corporations at the same time. There has to be loyalty. Now, like I mentioned, we will be going into the doctrine of corporate opportunity kasi it ties also into loyalty. You will see. Generally, where a director by virtue of such office acquires a business opportunity which should belong to the corporation, thereby obtaining profits to the prejudice of such corporation, the director must account for and refund to the latter all such profits. So, merong isang potential business opportunity na kayang deliveran ng korporasyon. But what the director did, siguro meron siyang business na iba pa on the side, which incidentally deals with the same material or with the same business na kung saan nag-ooperate yung mismong korporasyon. So, ang ginawa ni director, potential business opportunity, kinatalon niya yung sarili niyang korporasyon. What he did is that inunahan niya gamit yung sarili niyang business. No? So, yun yung nakinabang. According to the doctrine of corporate opportunity, bilang director ka pa man ding naturingan, what you should do is that, syempre, kumita yung personal mong business. Any proceeds should be redounded to or refunded to the corporation because it should have been the corporation which, should have entered into that agreement, should have entered into that contract, should have benefited from that business opportunity. By way of exception, this doctrine can be not applied if the act has been ratified by a vote of the stockholders owning or representing at least 2/3 of the outstanding capital stock. So, pwedeng i-waive ng korporasyon through a 2/3 vote of the stockholders. Now, sinabi dun sa doctrine of corporate opportunity, itong phrase na to, business opportunity which should belong to the corporation. What does this phrase mean? Well, rather simple, no? Which the corporation is financially able to undertake, which from its nature is in line with the corporation's business and is of practical advantage to it, and one in which the corporation has an interest or a reasonable expectancy. So it is a business opportunity kung kaya siyang gawin or i-deliver ng korporasyon, in line siya doon sa business ng korporasyon, and if the corporation manages to snag that deal, that corporation would be in a clear advantage. And of course, one in which yung korporasyon has an interest in. So I hope that's clear. let us move forward to the concept of interlocking directors. Yan. There are such a thing called interlocking directors, which are persons who serve as members of the board of directors of two or more competing corporations or corporations engaged in practically the same kind of business. Rather rarely, but it happens. Unfortunately, mga board of director na nakaupo, mga director na nakaupo sa mga board ng magkaribal o magkabilang korporasyon. Crazy, right? But sometimes true. Ang tawag natin dyan ay interlocking directors. Like here, for example, let me read to you. This is an article regarding competition law. Sabi dito, back in 2009, the Federal Trade Commission, basically an American government agency, investigated the relationship between Google and Apple. Now, of course, at this point in time, we know that Google and Apple are at the opposite sides of the tech arena. Google with its Android devices, supplying the software for Samsung, for Huawei, for Oppo, and for everything else that highly relies on Android. So that's Google on one hand. And on the other hand, we have Apple with iOS and the iPhone series. Ngayon, we can see that the competition between the two is rather aggressive, with new phone models being released, kung hindi man every other year, but every year. But this was not really the case always, because in 2009, the FTC managed to uncover an odd relationship between these two competing companies. So apparently, Google CEO Eric Schmidt sat at the board of directors of Apple. And Arthur D. Levinson, one-time Genentech CEO, sat at the boards of both corporations, so both Apple and Google. So mga interlocking directors sina Schmidt at Levinson. The FTC publicly commended Google and Apple for recognizing that overlapping board members between competing companies raise serious antitrust issues. Diba? So how can we really say that the competition is not engineered in order to reap better higher income from both captive markets, considering na meron pala kayong common na directors? So what assurance do we have that you're not conniving behind our backs? Diba? So that's the deal with that. So dito, once it was uncovered that Apple and Google had interlocking directors, the directors concerned resigned from the respective boards. So dito sa Pilipinas, meron tayong mga tinatawag na interlocking directors with nominal interest and interlocking directors with substantial interest, as well as interlocking directors with both. Okay? We'll be explaining the nuances in a bit. By nominal interest, ibig sabihin na kung saan ang interest ni director only amounts to 20% or less of the outstanding capital stock. Substantial interest naman if the interest exceeds 20%. So pag sinabi nating interlocking directors with both nominal and substantial interests, pwedeng in Corporation A, nominal lang ang interest niya. Pero dun sa Corporation B, where this director also sits as part of the board, substantial na yung kanyang interest. Now, if the interest of the interlocking director in one of the corporations is substantial, while nominal in the other, the contract entered into between Corporation A and Corporation B shall be valid if and only if the following conditions are met. Insofar as the latter corporation, doon kay nominal, kung saan may nominal interest lang si interlocking director, insofar as the latter corporation is concerned. Number one, the presence of such director or trustee in the board meeting in which the contract was approved was not necessary to constitute a quorum for such meeting. So basically, yung attendance niya, hindi naman yung nagmamatter. Kasi kahit na wala siya, may quorum pa rin naman. Next, B, that the vote of such director or trustee was not necessary for the approval of the contract. So kahit na hindi siya bumoto, kahit na nag-abstain siya, the contract would still be approved. The vote would still be carried. And C, that the contract is fair and reasonable under the circumstances. Now, if A and B are absent, so okay, nando doon si interlocking director as part of the quorum, and therefore, yung boto niya is needed, no, in order to determine whether there is a majority vote. So, pwedeng bahagi siya ng majority. Without which, without yung boto niya, hindi mapupush through yung vote or yung contract. The contract, if A and B are absent, the contract can be ratified by the vote of the stockholders representing at least 2/3 of the outstanding capital stock or at least 2/3 of the members in a non-stock corporation in a meeting called for the purpose voted to ratify the contract. So pwedeng i-ratify kahit na bahagi ng quorum itong si interlocking director. Pwede siyang isalba nung 2/3 ng mga stockholders or 2/3 ng members for non-stock in a meeting called for the purpose. If they vote to ratify, provided that, number one, there must be on the part of the interlocking director full disclosure of the adverse interest. Kinakailangan niyang mag-come clean. Kailangan niyang umamin sa lahat ng concerned na, oo, interlocking director ako. Ito yung degree or amount ng aking interest, monetary interest dito sa isa pang korporasyon. There has to be full disclosure of the adverse interest of the directors or trustees involved, which is made on such meeting. And of course, that the contract must be fair and reasonable under the circumstances. So, we have already passed upon, no, the obligations of a director. Now, having gone through all that, we will now deal with the question of how do we remove a director? Ang director ay hindi empleyado ng korporasyon. If you can still remember your Law 102A, kung sakasakaling umabot pa kayo ng labor standards, you would know that an employee can only be removed for cause. And of course, after notice and hearing. On the other hand, the general rule for directors or trustees would be that any director or trustee may be removed from office with or without cause. That's under Section 27 of the Revised Corporation Code. So pwede kang tanggalin ng walang dahilan. Isang araw, kung hindi ka lang nila trip, no? Kung hindi nila trip itong director na to, that is sufficient reason to strike that director down, to terminate his or her services. Now, of course, by way of exception, if the director was elected by the minority, which presupposes what? Straight voting? No, cumulative voting. If the director was elected by the minority, there must be cause for the removal. Bakit? Because the Corporation Code, the Revised Corporation Code, upholds and respects the minority's right to representation. Kapag tinanggal without cause yung director na ibinoto, iniluklok ng minority, the minority would be disenfranchised. Who would be looking out for their interests now? Diba? If the director, they voted into office doon sa board, would be unceremoniously taken out. Hindi pwede yun. There must be cause for the removal. Now, what are the requisites in order to remove a director or trustee? First, of course, the removal must take place at a meeting, whether regular or special, a meeting of the stockholders or members called for the purpose. And then, there must be previous notice to the stockholders, the members, of the intention to remove a director. So basically, there must be a meeting with notice in advance. Next, the matter must be put to a vote. There must be a vote of the stockholders representing 2/3 of the outstanding capital stock, or for non-stock corporations, 2/3 of the members entitled to vote. So again, There must be a meeting, whether regular or special. There must be prior notice of the meeting. And then finally, there must be a vote. No? 2/3 vote in order to remove a director. Now, the SEC may also itself move a director or trustee, either motu proprio or sa kanilang sariling initiative, or upon a verified complaint filed by an interested person, and after due notice and hearing, no, the SEC may exercise its power to remove. Now, who can be removed by the SEC? Very limited din kasi. The SEC can only remove directors falling within these categories. Number one, no, a disqualified director or trustee which was elected despite the disqualification. Yun pala, convicted pala of murder. Ano ang penalty for murder? Imprisonment, reclusion perpetua, 20 years and 1 day to 40 years. Di hamak na mas matagal kaysa dun sa 6-year threshold ng batas, di ba? And therefore, he should not have been elected as a director. Another classification of directors that may be removed by the SEC ay yung director or trustee whose disqualification arose or was discovered subsequent to an election. So wala naman talagang kamalay-malay ang lahat na yun pala nakulong pala itong director na to ng 20 taon at 1 araw. Nalaman na lang nung nanalo na siya. No? So the disqualification arose only after the election, or at least came to the knowledge of the people. Now, we've gone to the matter of meetings. Nakakailang beses na tayong nag-cite na kinakailangang may meeting for this purpose, which may be regular or special. So, let us answer that. No? Let us answer that concern. What is a regular meeting? What is a special meeting? A regular meeting, class, is a meeting held monthly as a general rule. Now, of course, the bylaws may provide for a different interpretation of regular, no? Pwedeng ano ba ang regular? Pwedeng once every 2 months, pwedeng twice a year, pwedeng annual, no? Depende sa kung ano ang gusto at kung ano ang nakalagay sa bylaws. Now, if the bylaws do not provide for any contrary interpretation of the term regular, then we follow monthly. Regular meetings would be buwan-buwan. Now, special meetings naman. Special meetings may be anytime upon the call of the president. So if the president calls for a special meeting, then a special meeting will happen. Subject to the notice requirement, no? Or, no, if the bylaws provide for a different means by which special meetings may be conducted, then of course, we follow the bylaws. Now, I made mention of the notice requirement. Gaano ba katagal na notice? No, ano ba yung respectful? The notice should be given to the parties or the attendees, whether it's for a regular meeting or a special meeting, kailangan at least 2 days before the meeting. So if the special meeting is held or will be held on May 23, kinakailangan, no, napadala na yung notice of meeting nitong nakaraang Biyernes. So that would have been May 20. In order to comply with the notice requirement. Hindi pwedeng the day before. That would be in contravention of the code already.